I was lying in a hospital bed, weak from surgery, when I called my only son. I just needed to know he would come visit. His answer didn't just break my heart, it started a war. He told me, "Mom, I'm just too busy. This work conference is my #1 priority." But he wasn't at a conference. I discovered his cruel lie just a few hours later. And the plan I put into motion from that hospital bed didn't just teach him a lesson. It made him regret the day he ever underestimated his mother. Before I tell you exactly what he did and the revenge I got, do me one small favor. Let me know in the comments what city you're listening to my story from. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. The silence in a hospital room has a sound all its own. It's not quiet. It's a low hum of machinery, the distant squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the muffled conversation of people living lives that have nothing to do with you. For 40 years, I was part of that noise. As the head nurse on the surgical floor of a major Chicago hospital, I was the one with the squeaking shoes and the hushed, urgent conversations. I understood this world. I knew its rhythms, its smells, its sterile embrace. But that day, lying under a thin blanket with a new titanium knee, I wasn't a nurse. I was just a patient, a 68-year-old woman feeling every single one of her years. The surgery had been a success, they told me. A routine knee replacement. I'd put it off for years, enduring the grinding pain because there was always something more important. When my son, Mark, was in college, his tuition was more important. When he and his wife, Tiffany, bought their first house, their down payment was more important. I finally decided to have it done for them in a way. They had been talking about starting a family, and I pictured myself chasing a grandchild around a park, pushing a swing, picking them up without wincing in pain. That picture gave me the courage to finally schedule the operation. My husband, Frank, passed away 6 years ago. It was sudden, and it left a hole in my life that I knew would never be filled. Mark was my only family left, my world, and even though he was a grown man of 42 with his own life, a part of me would always see him as the little boy with scraped knees who needed his mom. So, as the anesthesia wore off and the dull ache in my leg sharpened into a fierce throb, I reached for the phone on the rolling table beside me. All I wanted was to hear his voice, to anchor myself to something familiar in this sea of sterile white. He answered on the third ring, his voice hurried. "Hey, Mom, how'd it go? Everything okay?" I smiled, a genuine wave of relief washing over me. "It went fine, honey. The doctor said it was perfect. I'm just a little sore." "That's great, Mom. Really great," he said. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background. He was working. My Mark, always so driven. I felt a familiar pang of pride. "I was just thinking," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Once I'm in the recovery wing tomorrow, do you think you and Tiffany might have time to pop in? Just for a little while. It would be so nice to see you." The clicking stopped. A long sigh came through the phone. It was a sound I knew all too well. It was the sound that came before an excuse. "Oh, Mom," he started, his voice laced with that practiced, patient tone he used when he was about to let me down gently. "I would love to. You know I would. But this week is just impossible. I have that huge sales conference downtown. It's back-to-back meetings from sunrise to sunset. My boss would have my head if I ducked out. It's my #1 priority right now." The words hung in the air between us. #1 priority, a conference, in Chicago. The hospital was right here, in the same city. He could have come for 30 minutes, 20, 10. He could have come on his lunch break. He could have come after his last meeting of the day. But he didn't offer. He just presented the excuse like a brick wall I was supposed to run into and accept. "Oh," I said. The word felt small and empty. "Of course. I understand. Work is important. Thanks for understanding, Mom. You're the best," he said, the relief in his voice unmistakable. "Listen, I've got to run. My next session is starting. I'll try to call tomorrow, okay? Love you." "I love you too," I whispered, but he had already hung up. I placed the phone back on the table, my hand trembling slightly. The pain in my knee was nothing compared to the ache that had just opened up in my chest. For years, I had been his #1 priority. I had worked double shifts to pay for his baseball camps. I had used my savings to help him buy a car. I had co-signed the loan on his first big business venture, a risk that had kept me up at night for months. I did it all without a second thought, because that's what a mother does. But things had changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. It started after he married Tiffany. Suddenly, my invitations to dinner were met with, "We're just so busy." My requests for help with a leaky faucet were answered with, "I'll try to get to it next week." My sun, my world, was now a planet orbiting a different sun, and I was just a distant moon, growing colder and farther away with each passing year. Lying there, staring at the acoustic tile ceiling, I thought that phone call was the most painful part of my recovery. I truly believed his rejection was the lowest I would feel. I had no idea it was all a lie, and that the real pain hadn't even begun. For the next 24 hours, I tried to be the mother I had always been, the understanding one. I told myself that Mark was right. His career was demanding. He was building a future for his own family, and that required sacrifice. My generation, I reasoned, we just had a different idea of duty. I shouldn't hold him to my own outdated standards. I played these arguments over and over in my head, a familiar loop of justification that I had perfected over many years. It was a flimsy shield, but it was the only one I had against the sharp truth of my loneliness. The nurses were kind and efficient, but they were strangers. Their compassion was professional. I yearned for a familiar touch, a private joke, the simple comfort of family. The next afternoon, as I was struggling through my first painful attempt at physical therapy, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. I shuffled back to my bed, my new knee screaming in protest, and eagerly picked it up, hoping it was Mark. It wasn't. It was a text from Tiffany. My heart sank a little, but I tried to be optimistic. Maybe she was checking in, offering to bring me something from home. I opened the message. It read, "Hi, Carol. Hope you're recovering well. So, exciting news. Mark's car totally died on the way home yesterday. It's a goner. LOL. We found a great deal on a new SUV, but we're just a little short on the down payment. We were wondering if you could help us out with maybe $5,000. It would be a huge help. Let me know." I read the message 3 times. There was no question about my pain, no offer to visit, not even a simple, "How are you feeling?" It was a business transaction wrapped in a thin veneer of pleasantry. They saw my name on their contact list and saw a solution to their problem. Nothing more. The LOL about the car felt particularly cruel, as if their minor inconvenience was a funny little anecdote. I was lying in a hospital bed after major surgery, and they were car shopping. Every instinct in my body screamed, "No!" Say no, Carol. For once in your life, put yourself first. Tell them you can't. Tell them you're offended they would even ask right now. But I didn't. With trembling fingers, I opened my banking app on my tablet. The shame was a hot flush on my face, even though I was completely alone. I felt pathetic, weak. A part of me knew that if I sent the money, I was just rewarding their behavior, teaching them that no matter how much they ignored me, the bank of Mom would always be open. But another deeper part of me, a part that was terrified of losing them completely, saw it as a transaction for their affection. Maybe, I thought, if I do this for them, they'll be so grateful. Maybe this grand gesture will remind them of how much I do for them. Maybe they'll show up here with flowers. It was a stupid, desperate thought, and I knew it. But in that moment of weakness and pain, it was enough. I typed in the amount, $5,000. I authorized the transfer, and I sent it. Then I texted Tiffany back a simple, "Of course, just sent it. Happy to help." Her reply came back almost instantly. A single emoji of a smiley face with hearts for eyes. That's what $5,000 and a piece of my self-respect was worth. An emoji. The next day, Mark finally called. His voice was cheerful, booming through the phone. "Hey, Mom! Tiff told me you came through for us. You're a lifesaver. That new SUV is going to be amazing. I'm glad I could help, honey, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. So, you're doing okay, right? The nurses treating you well? It was a token question. He didn't wait for an answer before plowing ahead. This conference has been a real bear. I'm exhausted. You wouldn't believe the pressure I'm under. But I think I'm about to close a huge deal. It could mean a big promotion. He went on for another 10 minutes. About his meetings, his clients, and his brilliant strategies. He didn't ask about my physical therapy, or if I was eating, or if I was scared. He just needed to unload his own stress, to have me play the role I always had, his supportive, ever-present audience. I made the appropriate noises. "Oh, that's wonderful, Mark," and "I'm so proud of you." When he finally ran out of steam, he ended the call the same way he always did. "All right, Mom. Gotta run. Love you." The line went dead, and the silence that followed was heavier than before. It was now filled with the weight of my foolishness. The money was gone, and nothing had changed. There would be no flowers. There would be no surprise visit. I had paid for a car they didn't need, and all I got in return was a 10-minute monologue about his job. Later that day, a cheerful discharge nurse came in with a clipboard. "Okay, Carol," she said. "Let's talk about your plan for when you go home. We like to have a family member here for this part, to go over the medication schedule and physical therapy requirements. Is your son on his way?" I looked at her bright, expectant face, and the lie came easily, smoothly. It was a well-practiced line. "Oh, he's been swamped at work. A huge conference. You know how it is. But don't worry, I was a nurse for 40 years. I know the drill." She smiled, satisfied, and continued down her checklist. But inside, I felt a deep, humiliating shame. I was making excuses for my own son, hiding his neglect from a stranger. I was protecting his reputation while he was leaving me to handle this all on my own. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The pain in my knee was a constant, throbbing reminder of my physical vulnerability, and the pain in my heart was a dull, heavy ache. I felt utterly alone, adrift in the quiet hum of the hospital at midnight. I reached for my tablet, desperate for a distraction. I scrolled through news articles, looked at pictures of puppies on social media, anything to fill the emptiness and silence the nagging voice in my head that called me a fool. I just wanted to feel connected to something, to see a friendly face or read a happy story. And that's when I saw it. A post from one of Tiffany's friends, someone I barely knew, a new photo album, publicly shared for the world to see, and a title that was about to burn my entire world to the ground. The album was titled, "Celebrating 15 Amazing Years in Sunny Miami." It was posted by one of Tiffany's friends, a woman named Brenda who I'd met a few times at holiday dinners. My first thought was that it must be an old album, a memory that had resurfaced on her social media feed. Mark was in Chicago. He was at a conference. My mind clung to that fact like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. It was the only explanation that made sense, the only one that wouldn't shatter me. But then I saw the date it was posted, 2 hours ago. My thumb hovered over the image, trembling. A part of me knew I should close the app, turn off the tablet, and go to sleep. A wiser, more cowardly part of me was screaming to let the lie stand, because the truth felt like a dark, bottomless pit I was about to fall into. But I couldn't stop myself. I tapped on the photo. The album opened, and the first picture loaded. It was Tiffany, leaning against the railing of a balcony, a brilliant blue ocean stretching out behind her. She was wearing a white sundress and oversized sunglasses, holding a glass of something pink and bubbly. She was radiant. The caption read, "Our view for the week. My amazing hubby knows how to treat a girl right. Anniversary getaway." My breath caught in my throat. The room, which had felt cold, suddenly felt suffocatingly hot. I clicked to the next photo. This one was a group shot, taken at a crowded, festive-looking restaurant. There were 4 couples, all smiling and laughing, and right in the center was my son, my Mark. He had his arm wrapped tightly around Tiffany's shoulders, and, in his other hand, he held up a cocktail glass and a toast. He was wearing a ridiculously bright floral shirt, his face tanned and relaxed, his smile wider than I had seen it in years. This was not the face of a man under immense pressure at a work conference. This was the face of a man without a care in the world. I zoomed in, my fingers shaking, and checked the date stamp on the post. It was from the previous evening. The same evening he had called me. The same evening he had sighed and told me his work was his number one priority. The lie was no longer a possibility. It was a fact. A cold, hard, undeniable fact. But it got worse. I kept scrolling, propelled by a morbid, self-destructive curiosity. The next photo was of 2 airline boarding passes, artfully arranged next to 2 passports on a marble countertop. The flight was from Chicago to Miami. I zoomed in on the date. They had flown out 2 days ago, the day before my surgery. This wasn't a spontaneous trip. He had planned this. He had known for days, maybe weeks, that he wouldn't be in Chicago. He had known he would not be there for me, and he had chosen to lie about it. He had let me go into surgery believing he was just a few miles away, too busy to visit, when in reality he was 1,000 miles away, starting his vacation. Then I saw the last photo, the one that finally broke me. It was a selfie of Mark and Tiffany on a white sand beach. He was grinning foolishly at the camera, sand on his cheek, while Tiffany kissed his temple. They looked like a couple from a travel brochure. And the caption, written by Tiffany, was the final twist of the knife. It read, "He told his boss it was a conference. He told his mom he was busy. All for our special surprise trip. My husband, the master of secrets, soaking up the sun and feeling so blessed. Miami. Secret getaway. Husband of the year." The winking emoji seemed to mock me from the screen. He didn't just lie to me. They were celebrating the lie. They had turned my pain and loneliness into a funny little anecdote, a cute story to tell their friends about how clever they were. They were bragging about their deception online. And then, the final crushing realization landed on me with the force of a physical blow. The $5,000. The emergency money for the new car. It wasn't for a car. It was for this. For the cocktails, the fancy dinners, the oceanfront hotel. I hadn't just been ignored. I had been used. I had financed the very vacation that was their excuse for abandoning me. The tablet felt impossibly heavy in my hands. The low hum of the hospital machinery faded into a loud, roaring buzz in my ears. I stared at my son's smiling face on the screen, but I didn't recognize him. This smiling stranger on the beach was not the boy I had raised. The boy I raised valued honesty. The boy I raised loved his mother. All the little hurts and slights from the past few years suddenly coalesced into one ugly picture. Every canceled plan, every unreturned phone call, every time I felt like an afterthought. It wasn't just him being busy. It was a deliberate, calculated campaign of disrespect. I was not a priority. I was a resource, a safety net to be used and then forgotten. A young nurse bustled in to check my vitals, her face a mask of cheerful professionalism. She took my blood pressure and frowned slightly. "Everything okay, Carol?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Your heart rate is a little high. Are you in pain? Do you need me to get you some more morphine for that knee?" I looked up from the glowing screen, from the picture of my smiling, deceitful son, and met her eyes. I just shook my head slowly. The pain I was feeling wasn't in my knee, and it was a pain that no drug in the world could ever hope to touch. After the nurse left, I just sat there, the tablet still glowing in the semi-darkness of the room. The cheerful faces of my son and his wife stared up at me, frozen in a moment of carefree betrayal. For a long time, I didn't feel anger. Anger would have been a hot, explosive emotion. This was different. This was a profound, hollowing grief. It was the quiet, devastating realization that the son I had loved, the boy I had raised, was a stranger to me. Or worse, that he had never really existed at all. I had built him in my own mind, piece by loving piece, and the man on that beach had just taken a sledgehammer to the entire sculpture. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep for tears, the betrayal too absolute. Tears felt like a currency I was no longer willing to spend on him. Crying would mean the wound was still fresh, still bleeding, but this felt like an instant scar, a place in my heart that had been flash-frozen, cauterized by the sheer coldness of his deception. My grief was not for the loss of a visit or for the lie about a conference. It was for the loss of the last 30 years, a period of my life where I had poured my love, my energy, and my money into a person who saw it all as his due. Slowly, methodically, I began to scroll through the photos again. This time, I wasn't looking with the eyes of a heartbroken mother. I was looking with the detached precision of a nurse examining a chart. I noted the dates. I read and reread the captions. I zoomed in on the details, the expensive logo on Tiffany's sunglasses, the brand of champagne on their table, the casual way my son had his arm around her, a picture of smug contentment. Each image was a piece of evidence. Each word in the captions was a confession. I thought about the $5,000, transferred from this very bed, while I was wincing in pain, trying to be the good mother. That money, which I had earmarked for repairing the roof on my house, was likely paying for the very bottle of champagne he was holding in that photo. The indignity of it was staggering. It was so brazen, so utterly devoid of respect or love, that it almost defied belief. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had made me a willing accomplice in my own humiliation. As the first hints of a gray Chicago dawn began to filter through the window, something inside me shifted. The grief, so heavy and suffocating, began to recede, and in its place, a strange and unfamiliar feeling began to grow. It was an icy calm, a clarity so sharp and pure it was almost painful. For years, my love for Mark had been a warm, blurry thing, a soft focus lens that had allowed me to forgive his flaws and excuse his neglect. That lens was now shattered, and for the first time, I was seeing him, and my life, in stark, unforgiving detail. I saw a woman who had allowed her love for her child to be used as a weapon against her, a woman who had accepted crumbs of affection as if they were a feast, a woman who had consistently placed her own needs, her own security, her own self-respect, at the bottom of the list. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the tablet. I saw the tired lines around my eyes, the pale, washed-out color of my skin in the dim hospital light, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pity, but a fierce, protective anger, not for what he had done to me, his mother, but for what he had done to this woman staring back at me. And I decided, right then and there, that she deserved better. My movements became deliberate. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a strategist. With a steady hand, I navigated to the photo album. One by one, I took a screenshot of every single picture. I captured every caption, every date stamp, every smug smile. I saved them all to a new, password-protected folder on my tablet. The folder was labeled simply, Evidence. This would not be a screaming match over the phone. There would be no tearful confrontation where he could twist my words and use my emotions against me, making me feel guilty for being upset. He had played his game of secrets and lies. Now, I would play mine. His was a game of selfish pleasure. Mine would be a game of consequences. He felt no emotion when he lied to me, so I would feel no emotion when I delivered his justice. The young nurse came back a little while later to check on me again. She saw that I was still awake and offered me a sleeping pill. "You need your rest to heal, Carol," she said kindly. I looked at her and gave her a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice even and clear. "But I don't need that. I don't want to sleep." She looked at me, a little confused, but nodded and left the room. She was right. I did need to heal. But the healing I was focused on now had nothing to do with the new joint in my knee. For the first time in years, I felt completely and utterly wide awake. He had made his choices in the warm Miami sun. Now, in the cold, sterile quiet of this hospital room, I was about to make mine. Getting discharged from the hospital felt like being released from a prison. Not just a prison of physical pain, but of helplessness. The moment the taxi pulled up to my quiet brick bungalow on the south side of Chicago, I felt a sense of resolve settle deep in my bones. This house was mine. Frank and I had bought it 50 years ago. We had paid off the mortgage, nail by painful nail. We had raised our son within these walls. It was my sanctuary, my fortress, and the only ground I had left to defend. As I slowly made my way up the walkway, leaning heavily on a cane, I knew I wasn't just coming home to recover. I was coming home to prepare for battle. The next few days were a blur of physical therapy exercises and quiet, meticulous work. My body was weak, but my mind had never been sharper. The icy calm that had settled over me in the hospital had not thawed. If anything, it had hardened into a diamond edge of purpose. My first task was to understand the full scope of the damage. For years I had operated on a kind of emotional generosity, giving freely without ever keeping a true account. That was about to change. In my study, there is an old oak filing cabinet. It's where I kept 40 years of nursing certifications, hospital commendations, and every important family document. I went to the bottom drawer and pulled out 2 decades worth of old bank statements and checkbook registers. My handwriting, once a neat, efficient script, documented the slow and steady erosion of my savings at the hands of my son. I sat at my dining room table, the same tablet I'd used to discover his lie now, open to a new spreadsheet. The process was painstaking. I went through every statement, line by line. Each entry was a small ghost from the past, a memory of a crisis that, at the time, had felt so real. There was $10,000 from 2008, when Mark's first business venture failed. The reason he'd given me was a temporary cash flow problem. There was $1,500 from 2012 for an emergency root canal for Tiffany, which I now suspected had been for a designer purse. There were countless smaller amounts, $500 here for car repairs, $1,000 there to cover a credit card bill. The largest single amount was the $30,000 I had given them from my retirement savings for the down payment on their house. A gift I had been so proud and happy to give. One by one, I entered the date, the amount, and the stated reason into the spreadsheet. The columns grew longer and longer. By the time I was finished, 3 days later, the number at the bottom of the screen made me gasp. It was a staggering sum. It was an amount of money that could have funded a comfortable, worry-free retirement for myself. It was an amount of money that represented years of my double shifts, my careful budgeting, my skipped vacations. And I had given it all away for a handful of hollow thank yous, and, in the end, a winking emoji from a beach in Miami. Seeing the number in black and white changed everything. This wasn't just a case of a son being thoughtless. This was a long-term pattern of systemic financial exploitation. Now that I had the data, I needed the right weapon. I thought back over the years, to the countless conversations I'd had with colleagues at the hospital. I remembered my friend Margaret, the former director of administration. I remembered her once complaining good-naturedly about her sister, a total shark of a lawyer who specialized in estate planning. I found Margaret's number and dialed. Her voice was as warm and kind as I remembered. We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, and then I got to the point. I kept my voice steady, professional. Margaret, I hope this isn't too forward, but I'm in need of some specialized legal advice. I remember you mentioning your sister Catherine is in estate law. I was hoping you might pass along her information. There was a slight pause. Of course, Carol. Is everything all right? Everything is about to be, I said, and the words felt truer than anything I had said in years. I'm just getting my house in order. I spent the next 2 days before my appointment with Catherine researching. I learned about irrevocable trusts. I learned about inheritance advancements and promissory notes. I educated myself, arming myself with knowledge. I was not going to walk into that lawyer's office as a grieving mother. I was going to walk in as a client with a clear and achievable objective. On the morning of my appointment, as if on cue, a text from Tiffany lit up my phone. Hey, Carol. The new SUV is great, but the insurance is so expensive. Any chance you could help with the first premium? The old Carol would have sighed, felt the familiar knot of obligation in her stomach, and transferred the money. The new Carol simply looked at the message, a thin, cold smile touching her lips. and pressed delete. I then picked up my tablet, went to a medical supply website, and ordered myself the most expensive, comfortable, orthopedic recliner I could find. An item for my recovery. An item just for me. The confirmation email felt like a small but significant victory. The next morning, I dressed for my meeting with Catherine. I bypassed my usual comfortable sweaters and chose a navy blue suit I used to wear for hospital board meetings. It was a suit that radiated quiet authority, a suit that said I was not to be trifled with. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw the woman I used to be, the one who managed an entire surgical floor with calm, unwavering competence. She was still here. Mark and Tiffany thought they were playing a short game, a little con for a vacation and a new car. They had no idea I was about to change the rules of the entire match. Catherine Rourke's office was on the 30th floor of a building downtown, with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. The entire space was decorated in shades of gray and chrome, a landscape of cool, professional competence. There was no clutter, no personal photos, just the quiet, confident hum of a successful law practice. As I sat in a firm but comfortable leather chair opposite her large glass desk, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. This was a world I understood, a world of facts, strategies, and decisive action. Catherine was a woman who was probably 20 years my junior, with sharp eyes and an air of intense focus. She didn't waste time with small talk. After a brief, firm handshake, she got straight to the point. "Margaret told me you needed some assistance with your estate. Plan, Carol. Why don't you tell me what's on your mind?" I didn't start with the story about Miami. I didn't talk about my hurt feelings or my son's betrayal. I simply opened my leather satchel, took out a neatly printed copy of my spreadsheet, and slid it across the desk to her. "This," I said, my voice even, "is a detailed summary of undocumented financial transfers I have made to my son and his wife over the past 15 years. I have bank statements and check registers at home to corroborate every entry." Catherine put on a pair of reading glasses and began to study the document. I watched her eyes move down the columns, her expression unreadable. She was silent for a full minute, her focus absolute. When she finally looked up, she took her glasses off and set them down carefully on the desk. "Carol," she said, her voice measured, "this is a substantial figure. It represents a significant portion of the net worth you listed on your intake form. My first duty is to protect your remaining assets. That's why I'm here," I confirmed. "I want to be clear about my objective. I have no desire to sue my son. I don't want a messy public legal battle, but I cannot allow this pattern to continue. And I believe this long-term generosity needs to be formally accounted for." A flicker of understanding, perhaps even admiration, crossed her face. "You want to balance the scales," she said. It wasn't a question. "Precisely," I replied. She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen on her legal pad. "There are a number of ways to approach this. Given your desire to avoid a direct confrontation, I believe our most powerful tool is a well-structured, irrevocable trust. We can place your house and your primary investment accounts into the trust. This protects them from any future claims or attempts to persuade you to sell or withdraw funds. You would be the trustee, of course, retaining full control for your lifetime." This was what I had researched. This was what I had hoped for. But then she took it a step further. "Inside your will, which will govern the distribution of the trust upon your death, we can add a hotchpot clause. It's a bit of an old-fashioned term, but it's highly effective. It legally reclassifies all of these documented transfers as advancements on your son's inheritance. In plain English, when you pass, the total amount on this spreadsheet is deducted from his share of the estate before he sees a single dollar. The sheer, elegant justice of it was breathtaking. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about simple, undeniable arithmetic. Then, I added my own twist, the idea that had been forming in my mind since that lonely night in the hospital. "And the deducted amount," I said, leaning forward. "I don't want it to simply vanish back into the estate. I want it to go somewhere. I want to create something. The Carol Thompson Nursing Scholarship Fund. to be administered by my old hospital to help deserving young students. Catherine's professional demeanor broke for a second, and she smiled. A real smile. Now that, she said, is what I call turning a negative into a positive, taking funds that were squandered and transforming them into a legacy. I love it. She paused, her expression turning serious again. There is one thing to consider. Your son could contest the will. He could argue these were all gifts, given freely with no expectation of them being accounted for. It could get complicated. This was the moment. I reached into my satchel again and took out my tablet. I unlocked it, opened the folder labeled Evidence, and slid it across the desk next to the spreadsheet. I don't believe he will contest it, I said quietly. Catherine looked at the screen. She saw the first photo of Tiffany on the balcony, then swiped. She saw my son, grinning in his tropical shirt. She read the captions, her eyes lingering on the final one, the one with the winking emoji. Her face hardened. She swiped, back and forth a few more times, then looked up at me, a new, grim understanding in her eyes. No, she said, her voice firm. He won't contest it. She spent the next hour drafting the necessary documents. The language was precise, ironclad, and unforgiving. When she was finished, she printed them and laid them out on the desk before me. A new last will and testament. The formation of an irrevocable trust. The charter for the scholarship fund. She handed me a pen. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name on each designated line. The scratch of the pen on the thick paper was the only sound in the room. Each signature felt like a brick being laid in the foundation of my new life. A life where I was in control. A life where my security came first. A life where my legacy would be one of empowerment, not enablement. Catherine gathered the signed documents, her movements crisp and efficient. The originals were heading to a secure vault. I had my copies. The trap was set. The new reality was legally binding. As I was putting my things away, Catherine looked at me, a curious expression on her face. So, she asked, her pen hovering over her notes, when do you plan on informing your son about these changes? I paused, closing the clasp on my satchel with a soft click. I looked at her, and for the first time, I allowed myself a small, tight smile. Oh, I'm not going to tell him, I said. He's going to ask. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of blissful, uninterrupted silence. My physical recovery was ahead of schedule, and my emotional recovery was even faster. I spent my days in my new recliner, reading books I'd meant to read for years, and rediscovering the simple joy of my own company. I didn't hear a word from Mark or Tiffany, not a text, not a call. They had received their $5,000, the price of their Miami trip, and had vanished accordingly. I knew the quiet wouldn't last. Their greed was a constant, hungry thing, and eventually, it would need to be fed again. I was just surprised it happened so soon. They showed up on a Saturday afternoon, unannounced. I saw their new pearl-white SUV pull into my driveway. It was even bigger and more obnoxious than I had imagined. They came to the door bearing a bouquet of grocery store carnations, their faces arranged in masks of dutiful concern. "Mom," Mark said, forcing a bright smile as he gave me an awkward, one-armed hug. "We were so worried. We haven't heard from you. We wanted to make sure you were okay." The lie was so transparent it was almost comical. I simply nodded and let them in. They settled on my sofa, Tiffany looking around my cozy, familiar living room with a critical eye. "This house is so nice, Carol," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But don't you get lonely here all by yourself? It's so big for one person." The groundwork was being laid. I didn't take the bait. I just offered them some iced tea, which they accepted. They spent the next 10 minutes making small talk, asking about my knee, complimenting a new pillow I'd bought. It was a carefully rehearsed performance, and I was an unwilling audience member. Finally, Tiffany couldn't contain herself any longer. She clasped her hands together, her face alight with a practiced excitement. "Carol, we have the most incredible news. We found it. Our dream house." She launched into a breathless description of a ridiculously oversized house in a fancy suburb an hour away. She spoke of granite, countertops, a 3-car garage, and a sprawling backyard. "It's perfect for a family," she finished, looking pointedly at me. "A huge yard for our future kids to play in." Mark picked up the cue seamlessly. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Mom, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we can get it. We've been pre-approved for the loan. There's just one little hurdle. The down payment is significant." He named a number that made the $5,000 for the SUV seem like pocket change. It was an astronomical sum. He looked at me, his eyes full of manufactured hope. "We can't do it without you, Mom. This is about our future, about family. In fact," he added, playing what he clearly thought was his trump card, "it even has a beautiful private in-law suite on the first floor. It would be perfect for you down the road." There it was. The offer to warehouse me in my old age, in exchange for a massive 6-figure check. He thought he was being clever. He had no idea who he was talking to anymore. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. I let the silence stretch out, enjoying the flicker of uncertainty that crossed his face. Finally, I set my glass down. "Mark, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm and pleasant. "It sounds like a wonderful house. I truly hope you'll both be very happy there." Mark's smile widened. He thought he had won. "So you'll help us? Mom, you're the best. I knew you'd—" "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the room like a stone, sending ripples of shock across their faces. "I'm afraid I can't do that." They stared at me, their smiles frozen. Mark was the first to recover. "What? What do you mean you can't?" He laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Is this a joke?" "Very funny, Mom." "I'm not joking, Mark," I said, my voice losing none of its calm. "I cannot give you money for a down payment." Tiffany's sweet facade crumbled instantly. "Why not?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Is something wrong with your finances?" "My finances are perfectly in order," I replied, looking directly at her. "I have simply made some new long-term arrangements for my future. I am no longer in a position to make large, unplanned gifts." Mark's face was turning red. The confusion was rapidly morphing into anger. "New arrangements? What new arrangements? Mom, have you been talking to one of those scammy financial advisors? What have you done?" He stood up, beginning to pace in front of the fireplace. "You have a responsibility to your family. This is our future you're talking about, our children's future." His sense of entitlement was so profound, it was almost a force of nature. He genuinely believed that my money was, in fact, his money. When his anger didn't make me flinch, he abruptly switched tactics. His face crumpled into a mask of theatrical hurt. I can't believe this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything I do for you, everything we do, we're the only family you have. Dad would be so disappointed in you right now. He always believed that family came first. The mention of his father was a low blow, and he knew it. It was his ultimate weapon. In the past, it would have shattered my resolve. Now, it bounced harmlessly off the cool, smooth armor I had built around my heart. I just sat there, watching him, my expression unchanging. My silence was my shield and my sword. It completely unnerved them. They were used to arguments they could twist, tears they could manipulate, guilt they could exploit. They had nothing to fight against. They were shouting into a void, and the echo was just the sound of their own greed and desperation. Finally, defeated, Mark grabbed his keys from the coffee table. His face was a mask of ugly, impotent rage. "Fine," he spat. "Be that way. I don't know what's gotten into you, but you are making a huge mistake. You're going to regret this." He walked to the door and turned back, his eyes cold. "You're going to end up old and all alone." He slammed the door behind him. A few moments later, I heard the engine of the pearl-white SUV roar to life and then fade away down the street. The house was quiet again. He said I would end up alone. But as the sound of his car vanished, leaving only the peaceful ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I realized something profound. I hadn't felt this free, this unburdened, in decades. They came back 3 days later. It was evening, and a soft rain was falling, streaking the windows of my living room. There were no flowers this time, no pretense of a social call. When I opened the door, Mark was standing there with Tiffany hovering a few steps behind him, and his face was a tight mask of frustration. He looked like he hadn't slept. "We need to talk," he said, brushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door slowly and followed him into the living room. I took my seat in my new recliner, a quiet position of comfort and authority, and waited. He stood in the middle of the room, vibrating with a nervous, angry energy. "We've been talking about this for days, and it makes absolutely no sense," he began, his voice rising with each word. "You've never been like this. You've always supported me. You've always been there for us. Someone must have gotten into your head. Was it that lawyer? Did she convince you to do this? What lies has she been telling you?" He paused, taking a breath, his eyes searching my face for any reaction. I gave him none. My silence only seemed to fuel his agitation. "Look, if this is about us asking for help with the house, we can ask for less. We can find a smaller place. But to just cut us off completely, out of nowhere. It's cruel, Mom. It's just cruel. After everything we do for you, what did we ever do to deserve this?" There it was. The question. The one dripping with manufactured innocence. The one that assumed he was the victim. He had just handed me the opening I had been waiting for. I let the question hang in the air for a long moment. The only sound in the room, the ticking of the clock and the gentle drumming of the rain against the glass. "You're right, Mark," I said finally, my voice perfectly level. "I did change. And you're right. It happened suddenly. It happened while I was in the hospital." His expression shifted to one of confusion. This was not the response he expected. I reached for the tablet on the end table beside me. My movements were slow and deliberate. I tapped the screen, and it came to life. They both watched, a sense of unease starting to dawn on their faces. I opened the folder named Evidence. I didn't hand it to them. I simply turned the screen in their direction. On it was the first picture. Tiffany, on the balcony in Miami, smiling blissfully at the camera. A sharp intake of breath came from Tiffany's direction. Mark just stared, his mouth slightly open. The color began to drain from his face. They were frozen, caught in the bright, damning glow of the screen. I let them look at it for a moment before I spoke, my voice a quiet, devastating counterpoint to the falling rain. "You told me you were at a conference, Mark," I said softly. "You said it was your #1 priority." I swiped my finger across the screen. The next image appeared. Mark at the restaurant, tanned and happy, raising a glass in a toast. "You told me you were too busy to drive a few miles to see your mother after she'd had surgery." I swiped. Again. The selfie on the beach. 2 smiling, carefree faces. "You were having a wonderful time. You looked so happy, so relaxed." And then, the final swipe. The photo with the caption. The one that bragged about their deception. The one with the winking emoji. "You even thought it was funny," I continued, my voice still a near whisper. "A cute little secret. Something to be proud of. You thought it was clever to lie to me." They were both completely silent, their faces pale with shock and dawning horror. They had been so arrogant, so sure of their cleverness, that it had never occurred to them they would be caught. "And this," I said, my voice hardening just enough to cut through their shock, "is what my $5,000 paid for. The money I sent from my hospital bed while I was in pain, the money I thought was for a car you needed. It was paying for your cocktails, wasn't it? For your romantic getaway." Tiffany finally found her voice, a weak, stammering whisper. "Carol, it's not what it looks like. We were going to tell you about the trip." I ignored her. My eyes were locked on my son. I watched as his arrogance and anger finally crumbled, replaced by a deep, profound, and unfamiliar shame. He couldn't meet my gaze. He just stared at the floor. I turned the tablet off and set it back on the table. The evidence had done its job. The show was over. "So, Mark," I said, breaking the heavy silence, "to answer your question, the question you asked when you walked in here, what did we ever do to deserve this?" He flinched, but I continued. "You did that. You looked your mother in the eye, metaphorically, and you lied. You took my love, my trust, and my money, and you laughed about it behind my back. You taught me that my generosity was not a gift to be cherished, but a weakness to be exploited. And I have finally learned my lesson." I leaned back in my chair. The verdict was delivered. Now, for the sentence. The financial support is over. The Bank of Mom is permanently closed. The new arrangements I made are to protect my assets, my home, and my future from this day forward. They are for my peace of mind. And my legacy will be a scholarship for hardworking nursing students, not a slush fund for your next vacation or your dream house. I looked at him, my son, a man I barely recognized anymore. "The in-law suite you were so kindly offering me? I suggest you start looking for a tenant, because from now on, you and Tiffany will be funding your own dreams." He had nothing to say. There were no more arguments, no more excuses, no more manipulations. There was only the ugly truth, hanging in the air between us. He had asked what he did to deserve this. Now, standing in the ringing silence of my living room, looking at his shattered and ashamed expression, I knew he finally had his answer. The weeks after the confrontation bled into months. The anger and turmoil of that final meeting faded, replaced by a profound and lasting peace. Autumn arrived, painting the trees outside my window in brilliant shades of orange and red. I was fully healed from my surgery, my new knee allowing me to take long, painless walks in the crisp air for the first time in years. I moved through my days with a sense of lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The constant, low-level anxiety of waiting for my son's next manufactured crisis, the next request for money, was gone. The silence from his end of the line was no longer a sign of neglect, but a welcome affirmation of my freedom. I didn't seek out news of them, but in a city like Chicago, which can sometimes feel like a small town, news has a way of finding you. The first glimpse I had into their new reality came on a chilly morning in early November. I was at a local coffee shop, a place I'd started frequenting on my morning walks, treating myself to a latte. As I waited in line, I heard a familiar voice, though it was strained and tired. "I can take the next guest." "Over here." I looked toward the counter, and my heart gave a little jolt. It was Tiffany. She was wearing a green apron smeared with chocolate syrup, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. The expensive, perfectly manicured nails were gone, replaced by short, unpolished fingertips. She looked exhausted. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw a flash of pure, undiluted shame in her expression before she quickly looked away, her face hardening into a mask of professional indifference. When it was my turn, she took my order without looking at me, her voice clipped. "That'll be $5.75. I paid with my card, and she practically slid the machine back at me, immediately turning to the next customer. I never said a word. I just took my coffee and found a seat by the window. I wasn't happy to see her humbled. I just felt a quiet, sad sense of inevitability. The dream house was gone. The life of leisure was over. Reality had finally arrived. A few weeks later, my cousin Susan called for our weekly chat. After we had caught up on family news, she hesitated. "Carol," she said, her voice a little awkward, "I don't want to gossip, but I saw Mark at the grocery store last week. He looked rough, and he and Tiffany were having a rather loud argument in the frozen food aisle. About money, it sounded like. Is everything all right with them?" "They're just learning to stand on their own 2 feet, Susan," I said calmly. "It's a difficult adjustment for them." It was all I needed to say. The carefully curated image of the perfect, successful couple they had projected for years was crumbling under the weight of financial pressure. Without my money to smooth over the cracks, the flaws in their foundation were beginning to show. The final confirmation that they understood the new reality came one evening as I was clearing out old messages on my phone. I found a voicemail from Mark, left 2 weeks prior, that I had never listened to. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed play. His voice was tentative, stripped of its usual bravado. "Hey, Mom, it's me. Listen, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I know I messed up. Royally. I'm sorry. I really am. Sorry about the trip and, well, everything." There was a long pause. I could hear him take a shaky breath. "Things have been really tough, Mom. Tiffany had to get a job at a coffee shop. I'm working double shifts. We're going to have to sell the SUV. We're drowning." His voice cracked. "I was hoping maybe you could find it in your heart to forgive me. Maybe we could just talk. And maybe you could help us out. Just a little. Alone. Just to get us back on our feet." I listened to the message a second time. The apology was there, but it was wrapped in a request. He wasn't sorry for hurting me. He was sorry he was drowning. He hadn't learned the lesson about love and respect, only the lesson about money. The door was still open in his mind, just a crack, waiting for him to find the right words to pry it open again. I held my finger over the screen. There was no anger, no satisfaction, only a quiet finality. I pressed the delete button, and the message vanished. That door was not just closed, it had been dismantled, brick by brick. I never wished for them to suffer. A mother could never truly wish for that. But I knew, with a certainty that had been forged in the fire of his betrayal, that this was the only way for them to ever have a chance at a real life, a life built on their own two legs. They had to fall first. They had to learn the simple, hard truth that actions have consequences. Their old life, the one I had so foolishly and lavishly paid for, was over. And my new life, the one I was finally building just for me, was just beginning. A full year has passed since I last saw my son. An entire cycle of seasons, each one bringing with it a new layer of healing and peace. My life, which had felt so small and confined by obligation, has now opened up in ways I never thought possible. My garden, once a neglected patch of weeds, is now my pride and joy, a riot of colorful flowers and fragrant herbs. My knee is strong, and I've joined a walking group with a few other women from my neighborhood. We walk in the park every morning, rain or shine, talking, laughing, and sharing stories. They are good, kind women who see me for who I am, not for what I can give them. The money that once drained from my account in a steady stream of emergencies now accumulates, giving me a sense of security I haven't felt since my husband was alive. Last fall, I used some of it to take a trip I'd dreamed of my entire life. I went to the coast of Maine, and for 2 weeks, I did nothing but read books, eat fresh lobster, and watch the ocean crash against the rocky shore. I sent postcards to my new friends, but not to my son. That part of my life was over. I felt no anger about it, no bitterness, only a quiet, liberating acceptance. But the greatest joy, the truest measure of my new life, came last week. It arrived, as so many things do now, through the screen of my tablet. It was a scheduled video call, and when I answered, a bright, smiling young face appeared. Her name was Maria, and she was a second-year nursing student at the local university. She was also the first recipient of the Carol Thompson Nursing Scholarship. She was vibrant and articulate, her eyes shining with passion as she talked. About her studies, about her dream of working in pediatric care. "I was working 2 jobs, Ms. Thompson," she told me, her voice thick with emotion. "I was so afraid I would have to drop out. This scholarship, it didn't just pay my tuition. It gave me the freedom to actually focus on becoming a great nurse, like you were. It changed everything for me." Tears welled in my eyes as I listened to her. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. This was the result of my decision. The money that would have been squandered on a bigger SUV or a fancier vacation was now here, investing in this brilliant young woman's future. It was creating a legacy of care and compassion. I had taken the ugliest moment of my life and transformed it into something beautiful. This, I realized, was the sound of the scales being truly balanced. After we hung up, I sat in my recliner for a long time, looking out at the new spring blossoms in my garden. I thought about Mark and Tiffany. I don't know where they are or what they're doing now. I have no desire to know. The wound is no longer open, the scar no longer aches. I have learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of my life. You cannot force someone to value you. You can only value yourself enough to walk away from those who don't. For decades, I believed my most important role was to be a mother, a giver, a fixer of problems. I thought my worth was measured by how much I could sacrifice. I was wrong. My most important job was to be the guardian of my own peace, the protector of my own self-respect. The confrontation with my son wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of salvation. I didn't lose a son. I saved myself. The sun is warm on my face as it streams through the living room window. The house is quiet, filled with a peaceful, steady light. This is my life now. It is calm. It is my own. And it is enough. It is never too late to demand respect. It is never too late to take back your power and rewrite your own story. And never forget the most important lesson of all. True love, real family, the kind that matters. It doesn't use you. It values you. My peace of mind is now my greatest treasure. If my story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of women finding their voice at any age, please consider subscribing to this channel. Every new member is a vote of support, helping to build a community where stories like mine can be shared, heard, and celebrated. Thank you for listening.